The World Cup weather event. Every 4 years, the World Cup descends on the planet like a weather event. Offices grind to a halt. Grown adults cry in public, openly, without apology. An entire nation won't stop functioning because a ball went wide of a post. And somewhere in the middle of all of this collective fever, there you are, completely unbothered. Maybe slightly annoyed that your feed is full of jerseys. You've been told you're weird for this. Perhaps cold. Maybe you've had someone look at you with genuine concern, like your disinterest in a football tournament is a medical symptom worth investigating. Here's the thing, the psychology actually points the other way. So why do billions of people care so intensely about something they have literally zero control over? A game where strangers they've never met kick a ball on a pitch in a country they've probably never been to. And somehow, these fans feel like they won, or they lost. We played terribly today. You were on your sofa, basking in reflected glory. This is a psychological phenomenon called berging, basking in reflected glory. First studied by Robert Cialdini in 1976. He observed that university students were significantly more likely to wear their school's branded apparel the morning after their football team won than after they lost. They hadn't played, they hadn't coached, hadn't even watched in many cases, but proximity to the win felt like ownership of the win. The self, apparently, is a very opportunistic thing. What Cialdini was really documenting was how desperately people use group membership to manage their self-esteem. When the team wins, we won. When they lose, suddenly the language shifts. They played poorly today. The ego quietly sidesteps the wreckage. This isn't cynicism, by the way. It's just how social identity works. The search for belonging. Now here's where you come in. The person who watched the World Cup final last time and felt genuinely nothing. Because what sports fandom is really doing on a deep level is providing scaffolding. The tribal instinct, the need to belong to something, that drive doesn't disappear in humans who don't follow sport. You've just, presumably, built that scaffolding somewhere else. A subculture, a creative community, a career you're weirdly obsessed with, a friend group where you feel genuinely known rather than performing enthusiasm for a team you selected mostly because your dad liked them. The people who don't care about the World Cup aren't missing the human desire for belonging. They've just refused a specific vehicle for it. And frankly, the vehicle is a bit strange when you examine it. The neuroscience of unpredictability. Let's actually sit with what's happening in the brain of a deeply invested fan during a tense match. The uncertainty of the outcome creates a sustained state of anticipation. The reward circuitry fires not just when something good happens, but in anticipation of whether it will. Neuroscientists call this unpredictability a core feature of behavioral compulsion, the same mechanism, structurally, that makes slot machines so difficult to walk away from. Intermittent reinforcement. You don't know if the next spin will pay. Your brain stays engaged because the resolution keeps not arriving. Sports exploit some of the same reward mechanics that make gambling compelling. The gap between expectation and outcome, the near miss, the stoppage time goal that arrives just as you'd accepted the draw. For people who don't feel this pull, whose brains just don't hook onto the outcome of a match, this isn't emotional flatness. The hook requires a prior attachment. Without identification with one of the teams, there's no stake. And without a stake, the uncertainty doesn't feel compelling. It feels like watching a coin flip for an hour and a half. The weight of national identity. There's also something worth naming about the social pressure around the World Cup specifically, as opposed to regular league football. Every 4 years, there's this cultural moment where even people who don't follow club football are expected to suddenly care. Because it's nations. Now it's not just a team, it's your country, your flag, your collective identity made physical by 11 players you've never met. For some people, that framing works. The national dimension amplifies the attachment. It taps into something even larger than team identity. For others, And this gets rather interesting. The national framing actually makes it weirder, not more compelling. You didn't choose where you were born. You've had complicated feelings about your country for a decade. And now you're supposed to feel personally victorious because a man from that same country kicked a ball into a net? The emotional arithmetic doesn't land the same way. People who feel alienated from or indifferent to national identity find the World Cup's emotional logic the most alien part of the whole thing. Which isn't to say those people don't care about where they're from, they just have a messier relationship with it than a flag on a jersey can really hold. Studies on social identity consistently show that the intensity of how much you tie your self-concept to a group directly shapes how much a group's wins and losses actually mean to you. If the group never really grabbed you, the outcomes won't either. A modern media phenomenon. Where this tends to reframe everything a little uncomfortably for fans and non-fans alike, the version of sports fandom we're talking about, this deep emotional attachment to strangers performing athletically on a screen, is extraordinarily new in the span of human history. For most of our existence as a species, you couldn't follow a team. You couldn't even conceive of one, really. The parasocial attachment to people you've never met, feeling their wins as yours and their losses as a kind of personal grief, that's a product of mass media. Television, global broadcast rights. It became possible at scale sometime in the mid-20th century. Researchers like Horton and Wall were already noting in the 1950s that television was creating entirely new categories of one-sided emotional relationships between audiences and strangers on screen, something that had no real historical precedent. So, when people describe sports fandom as some ancient, hardwired instinct, and yeah, the underlying tribalism is real, the particular version of it we're talking about, jerseys and face paint and feeling personally bereaved when strangers lose a match you watched alone in your kitchen, that's a product of the 20th century, not prehistory. If you want to get weird about it, the person sitting completely unbothered through a World Cup final might actually be closer to how humans were built to respond. That's not a hot take, it's just a strange thing to sit with. The idea that non-fans are somehow missing a universal human experience, when the experience has only existed since color television. And to be fair to fans, the research backs them up. Highly identified supporters show real gains in self-esteem, lower loneliness, a sense of shared meaning that quietly functions like a social lifeline for a lot of people. That's not to be completely dismissed. Authentic identity. The distinction worth drawing, and this applies in both directions, is identity that fits, and identity that's borrowed because the room expects it. The fan who genuinely lights up when their country scores, who feels the loss the next day like a low hum in the background of everything, they're getting something real out of that. The person sitting next to them, faking it, performing grief they don't feel because opting out seems socially costly, they're just exhausted. The psychology of not caring about the World Cup isn't, in the end, about being more or less self-aware than anyone else. It's just that certain collective experiences land and others don't. And you can't really manufacture the landing. Apathy is indifference to everything. This is something more specific, a signal really, that your attachment system has already found somewhere else to be. Thus, your brain isn't wired wrong. It's just elsewhere. And if you know exactly where, if you have a thing or people or a world you actually light up about, that's the whole point. That's what the fandom was always trying to do.